Jennifer Hayes died on October 14, 1998. Her body was found 3 weeks later in a wooded area outside Cedar Falls, Iowa. She had been strangled. The last person to see her alive was a co-worker who watched her walk to her car in the hospital parking lot at 11:47 p.m. Between that moment and the discovery of her remains, something happened that would remain unsolved for more than 2 decades. The case file sat in a storage room at the Cedar Falls Police Department for years. Detectives retired. Evidence sat untouched. Jennifer's family waited for answers that did not come. The person responsible for her death walked free, lived a normal life, and believed they had gotten away with murder. Cedar Falls is a city of about 40,000 people in northeast Iowa. It sits along the Cedar River and is home to the University of Northern Iowa. Most people who live there work at the university, in manufacturing, or in healthcare. The city has a downtown area with local shops and restaurants. Neighborhoods are made up of single-family homes with front yards and 2-car garages. People know their neighbors. Crime rates are low compared to larger cities. When something serious happens, everyone hears about it. In 1998, Cedar Falls was the kind of place where residents felt safe leaving their doors unlocked. Parents let their children ride bikes around the neighborhood after dinner. The idea that someone could be murdered and the killer could vanish into the community was unthinkable. Jennifer Hayes grew up in Cedar Falls. She graduated from Cedar Falls High School in 1984. She was quiet in school but had a close group of friends. After graduation, she attended nursing school at Allen College in Waterloo, the city next to Cedar Falls. She earned her degree in 1988 and started working at Sartori Memorial Hospital in Cedar Falls. She worked the evening shift in the emergency department. Her shift started at 3 p.m. and ended at 11:30 p.m. She was known as a reliable and compassionate nurse. Doctors and other nurses respected her. Patients remembered her kindness. She never missed a shift unless she was sick. Jennifer lived alone in a small house on the east side of Cedar Falls. She had bought the house in 1995. It was a 2-bedroom ranch-style home with white siding and a small front porch. She kept the yard neat and planted flowers every spring. Her neighbors described her as friendly but private. She waved when she saw them outside. She did not host parties or have visitors over often. She had a younger sister named Rachel who lived in Des Moines. They talked on the phone every Sunday. Jennifer also had a close friend named Karen who worked with her at the hospital. They went out to dinner once or twice a month and sometimes saw movies together. Jennifer's life followed a routine. She woke up around noon. She ate lunch and did errands or housework. She left for work at 2:30 p.m. She drove a 1995 Honda Civic. The drive from her house to the hospital took about 10 minutes. After her shift ended, she usually stopped at a gas station to buy a soda or a snack. Then she drove home. She watched television for an hour or two before going to bed around 2 a.m. On her days off, she ran errands, cleaned the house, or spent time with Karen. She didn't date anyone seriously. She had been in a relationship a few years earlier, but it had ended. She told her sister she was content with her life and was not looking for anything to change. In the months before her death, people close to Jennifer noticed small changes. She seemed more tired than usual. She told Karen she was having trouble sleeping. She mentioned feeling like someone had been watching her, but said she could not explain why. Karen asked if something had happened at work or at home. Jennifer said no. She said she was probably just stressed. Rachel noticed during their phone calls that Jennifer sounded distracted. When Rachel asked if everything was okay, Jennifer said she was fine. She did not bring it up again. Later, after Jennifer was gone, both Karen and Rachel would replay these conversations in their minds. They would wonder if Jennifer had known something was wrong but had not wanted to worry them. They would ask themselves if they should have pressed her harder for answers. On October 14, 1998, Jennifer worked her regular shift at Sartori Memorial Hospital. It was a Wednesday. The emergency department was busy that evening. There had been a car accident on Highway 20 just outside the city. 3 people were brought in with injuries. Jennifer helped treat them. She also cared for other patients who came in with minor injuries and illnesses. Her co-workers said she seemed normal that night. She was focused and professional. She did not mention feeling upset or worried. At 11:30 p.m., her shift ended. She clocked out and said goodbye to the nurses who were starting the night shift. She walked out of the hospital through the main entrance. A co-worker named Linda Martinez was walking to her car at the same time. Linda saw Jennifer unlock her Honda Civic and get inside. Linda got into her own car and drove away. That was the last confirmed sighting of Jennifer Hayes alive. Jennifer did not come home that night. Her house was dark the next morning when her neighbor walked by. The neighbor did not think anything of it. Jennifer sometimes stayed with her friend Karen after work. The neighbor assumed that's where she was. But Jennifer had not gone to Karen's house. Karen tried calling Jennifer's home phone on Thursday afternoon. There was no answer. Karen was not immediately concerned. She thought Jennifer might have picked up an extra shift or gone shopping. When Jennifer did not show up for her shift on Thursday evening, the charge nurse at the hospital called her house. There was no answer. The charge nurse called Karen. Karen said she had not heard from Jennifer since Tuesday. The charge nurse called Jennifer's emergency contact, which was her sister, Rachel. Rachel said she had not spoken to Jennifer since their Sunday phone call. Rachel immediately called the Cedar Falls Police Department. 2 officers went to Jennifer's house on Thursday night. They knocked on the door. No one answered. They looked in the windows. The house appeared undisturbed. The lights were off. There was no sign of a struggle. The officers called Rachel and asked if she had a key to the house. Rachel did not. She lived 2 hours away in Des Moines. The officers decided to wait until morning to take further action. They drove by the house again early Friday morning. Jennifer's car was not in the driveway. The officers filed a missing persons report. They began calling hospitals and checking accident reports. There was no record of Jennifer being admitted anywhere. There had been no accidents involving her vehicle. By Friday afternoon, Rachel drove to Cedar Falls. She met with detectives at the police station. She gave them a description of Jennifer and her car. She provided names of Jennifer's friends and co-workers. She told them about Jennifer's routine and habits. She mentioned that Jennifer had seemed tired and worried in recent weeks, but had not explained why. The detectives took notes. They asked if Jennifer had any enemies or if anyone had been bothering her. Rachel said no. She said Jennifer was quiet and kept to herself. The detectives asked if Jennifer was involved with anyone romantically. Rachel said no. She said Jennifer had not dated anyone in over a year. Detectives began interviewing Jennifer's co-workers at the hospital. Everyone said the same thing. Jennifer was reliable, kind, and professional. She did not have conflicts with anyone. She did not seem upset or scared on the night she disappeared. Linda Martinez told detectives she had seen Jennifer get into her car and drive away. That was the last time anyone admitted to seeing her. Detectives checked the hospital parking lot. There were no security cameras in 1998. They could not verify what direction Jennifer had driven when she left. They checked the gas station where Jennifer usually stopped after work. The clerk on duty that night did not remember seeing her. Detectives searched Jennifer's house with Rachel's permission. Everything inside looked normal. The bed was made. The kitchen was clean. There were no signs of a break-in or a struggle. Jennifer's purse was not in the house. Her wallet, keys, and identification were missing. Detectives found her address book and began calling the people listed inside. No one had seen or heard from Jennifer since Wednesday night. Detectives also checked Jennifer's bank records. Her last transaction was a withdrawal of $40 from an ATM on Tuesday afternoon. There had been no activity on her accounts since then. The search for Jennifer Hayes became the top priority for the Cedar Falls Police Department. Officers searched parks, wooded areas, and fields around the city. They walked along the Cedar River. They checked abandoned buildings and empty lots. Volunteers from the community joined the search. Flyers with Jennifer's photo were posted all over Cedar Falls and the surrounding towns. Local news stations ran stories about the case. Rachel appeared on television and begged anyone with information to come forward. Days passed, then weeks. There was no sign of Jennifer or her car. On November 4, 1998, 3 weeks after Jennifer disappeared, a hunter found her body. He was walking through a wooded area about 8 miles south of Cedar Falls. The area was off a rural road that connected small towns in the county. It was not a place Jennifer would have driven unless she was lost or being taken somewhere against her will. The hunter saw what he thought was a pile of clothing near a fallen tree. When he got closer, he realized it was a body. He called 911. Officers and detectives arrived within 20 minutes. The body was badly decomposed. The medical examiner confirmed it was Jennifer Hayes. She was identified through dental records. The medical examiner determined that Jennifer had been strangled. There were injuries to her neck consistent with manual strangulation. She had been killed shortly after she disappeared. The medical examiner could not determine the exact time of death due to decomposition. There were no other significant injuries. There was no evidence of sexual assault. Jennifer's clothing was intact. Her purse, wallet, keys, and identification were missing. Her car was not at the scene. Detectives searched the wooded area for evidence. They found tire tracks on the dirt road nearby, but could not determine if they were connected to the case. They found no fingerprints, no murder weapon, and no witnesses. The discovery of Jennifer's body devastated her family and the community. Rachel returned to Cedar Falls for the funeral. Hundreds of people attended. The church was full. People stood outside. Nurses from the hospital wore their uniforms. Karen spoke at the service. She said Jennifer was the kindest person she had ever known. She said Jennifer deserved justice. The Cedar Falls Police Department promised they would find the person responsible. Detectives worked the case for months. They interviewed dozens of people. They followed up on tips. But they had no physical evidence that pointed to a suspect. They had no witnesses who saw anything. They had no clear motive. Jennifer's car was found 6 months later. A farmer in a town 30 miles west of Cedar Falls called police. He said there was an abandoned car on his property near the back of his field. It had been there for months, but he had not reported it because he thought someone had left it temporarily. When he finally checked the license plate, he realized it matched the description of Jennifer Hayes' car. Detectives examined the vehicle. It had been sitting in the field through winter. Rain and snow had washed away most evidence. The interior was empty. There were no fingerprints, there was no blood. The keys were missing. Detectives could not determine how the car had ended up in that location or who had driven it there. By the summer of 1999, the investigation into Jennifer Hayes' murder had stalled. Detectives had no new leads. The case remained open, but there was little they could do without evidence. Rachel called the police department every few months asking for updates. There were none. Years passed. The case file grew dusty. New detectives joined the department and old ones retired. Jennifer's murder became a cold case. Her family never stopped wondering who had killed her and why. The investigation into Jennifer Hayes' murder began the moment her body was discovered in the wooded area south of Cedar Falls. Detective Mark Holloway was assigned as the lead investigator. He had been with the Cedar Falls Police Department for 12 years. He had worked homicides before, but none in Cedar Falls itself. Most of his experience came from cases in larger cities where he had trained earlier in his career. When he arrived at the scene on November 4, 1998, he knew immediately that solving this case would be difficult. The body had been there for 3 weeks. The elements had destroyed potential evidence. There were no witnesses. There was no clear crime scene. Detective Holloway and his team spent 2 days processing the area where Jennifer's body was found. They photographed everything. They measured distances. They collected soil samples and plant material. They made plaster casts of the tire tracks on the dirt road. They searched for anything that might have belonged to the killer. They found cigarette butts, beer cans, and scraps of paper, but nothing that could be definitively linked to the murder. The location was remote, but it was not completely isolated. Hunters used the area during deer season. Teenagers sometimes drove out there to drink. Anyone could have left the items they found. The medical examiner's report provided limited information. Jennifer had been strangled manually. The killer had used their hands, not a rope or cord. There were bruises on her neck consistent with fingers pressing into her skin. The hyoid bone in her throat was fractured. This indicated significant force. The medical examiner estimated that death would have occurred within 2 to 4 minutes of the strangulation beginning. There were no defensive wounds on Jennifer's hands or arms. This suggested she had been unable to fight back or had been restrained in some way. There was no evidence of ligature marks on her wrists or ankles. There was no evidence of sexual assault. Her clothing was intact and showed no signs of tearing or disturbance. The lack of defensive wounds troubled Detective Holloway. It suggested that Jennifer had either been taken by surprise or had been incapacitated before the strangulation occurred. He considered the possibility that she had been drugged or knocked unconscious first. The medical examiner ran a toxicology screen. The results came back negative for drugs and alcohol. Jennifer's blood alcohol level was 0. There were no sedatives, narcotics, or other substances in her system. This meant she had been conscious when the attack occurred. The absence of defensive wounds suggested she might have known her attacker or had trusted them enough not to resist immediately. Detectives retraced Jennifer's movements on the night she disappeared. They knew she had left the hospital at 11:30 p.m. Linda Martinez had seen her get into her car. After that, there were no confirmed sightings. Detectives checked every business along the route Jennifer would have taken to drive home. Most were closed by that time of night. The gas station where Jennifer usually stopped was open until midnight. The clerk on duty that night was a man named Dennis Kowalski. Detectives interviewed him multiple times. He said he did not remember seeing Jennifer that night. He said he might have been in the back room stocking shelves when she came in. He said it was possible she had come and gone without him noticing. Detectives reviewed the gas station sales records. There was a transaction at 11:52 p.m. for a soda and a candy bar. The payment was made in cash. There was no way to confirm if Jennifer had been the customer. Detectives also investigated whether anyone had followed Jennifer from the hospital. They interviewed every staff member who had been working that night. No one reported seeing anyone suspicious in the parking lot. No one remembered seeing any unusual vehicles. The hospital parking lot was well lit, but there were no security cameras. Detectives asked if any patients or visitors had behaved strangely that evening. The nurses and doctors said no. Everyone who had been in the emergency department that night was accounted for. The patients from the car accident had been treated and either admitted or discharged. Their families had been present. Detectives ran background checks on all of them. None had criminal records or any connection to Jennifer. Rachel Hayes was devastated by her sister's death. She had held out hope that Jennifer would be found alive. When the police called to tell her a body had been discovered, she knew before they said anything else. She drove to Cedar Falls and identified Jennifer's belongings at the police station. She could not bring herself to view the body. Detective Holloway told her it was not necessary. He said the identification had been made through dental records. Rachel asked him who had killed her sister. Detective Holloway said he did not know yet. He promised her he would find out. Rachel said she trusted him. She said Jennifer had been a good person who had never hurt anyone. She said whoever did this needed to be held accountable. Karen, Jennifer's close friend from the hospital, struggled with guilt. She replayed every conversation she had with Jennifer in the weeks before the murder. Jennifer had told her she felt like someone was watching her. Karen had not taken it seriously. She had assumed Jennifer was just stressed or tired. After the murder, Karen wondered if Jennifer had been in danger and had tried to tell her. She wondered if she could have done something to prevent what happened. Detective Holloway interviewed Karen multiple times. He asked her to remember everything Jennifer had said. Karen told him Jennifer had never mentioned a specific person. She had never said she was afraid of anyone. She had just expressed a vague feeling of unease. Detectives developed a list of potential suspects. They started with people who had regular contact with Jennifer. They interviewed her coworkers at the hospital. They spoke to doctors, nurses, technicians, janitors, and security guards. They asked about Jennifer's relationships with patients. They reviewed hospital records to see if any patients had become fixated on her or had made inappropriate comments. They found nothing. Everyone described Jennifer as professional and kind. No one could think of anyone who would want to harm her. Detectives also looked into Jennifer's personal life. They interviewed her neighbors. No one reported seeing anything unusual on the night Jennifer disappeared. No one had seen her come home. No one had seen any unfamiliar cars in the neighborhood. Detectives asked if Jennifer had mentioned any problems or conflicts. Her neighbors said no. They said Jennifer kept to herself and seemed content. Detectives searched Jennifer's house again. They went through her mail, her phone records, and her personal papers. They found nothing that suggested a motive for murder. One theory detectives considered was that Jennifer had been the victim of a random attack. Perhaps someone had followed her from the hospital or the gas station. Perhaps someone had seen her alone and had decided to abduct her. This type of crime was rare in Cedar Falls, but it was not impossible. Detectives looked at similar cases in Iowa and surrounding states. They contacted other police departments to see if there had been any unsolved murders with similar characteristics. They found a few cases involving strangulation, but none that matched the details of Jennifer's murder closely enough to suggest a serial offender. Detectives also investigated whether Jennifer's car had been taken for a specific reason. The car had been found 6 months later in a field 30 miles from Cedar Falls. It had been abandoned there. Detectives tried to determine how the car had ended up in that location. The farmer who owned the field said he had not noticed the car until spring when he was preparing to plant crops. He estimated it had been there since late fall or early winter. The car showed no signs of having been stripped for parts. The interior was empty, but there was no significant damage. Detectives theorized that the killer had driven the car to the field to hide it. They did not know if the killer had walked away from the location or if someone had picked them up. Detectives checked if any other vehicles had been reported stolen or abandoned in the area around the same time. They found 2 reports of stolen vehicles, but both had been recovered and neither was connected to Jennifer's case. They also looked into whether the field had any significance. The farmer said the land had been in his family for generations. He did not know Jennifer or her family. He had no connection to Cedar Falls beyond selling his crops at regional markets. Detectives found no link between the location and the murder. As the investigation continued, detectives faced significant obstacles. The most critical problem was the lack of physical evidence. The scene where Jennifer's body was found had yielded almost nothing useful. The tire tracks could not be matched to a specific vehicle. The items found nearby could not be linked to the killer. The body itself had decomposed to the point where trace evidence was minimal. In 1998, DNA technology was advancing, but it was not as sophisticated as it would become in later years. Detectives collected samples from Jennifer's clothing and body, but the degradation made analysis difficult. The lab was able to develop a partial DNA profile from skin cells found on Jennifer's neck, but it was incomplete and could not be entered into any database at the time. Another obstacle was the absence of witnesses. No one had seen Jennifer after she left the hospital parking lot. No one had seen her car being driven to the field where it was abandoned. No one had heard or seen anything unusual in the area where her body was found. Detectives canvassed the neighborhoods along the routes Jennifer might have taken. They went door to door asking if anyone had seen anything on the night of October 14th or in the days that followed. They found nothing. They put up billboards asking for information. They offered a reward. Still, no one came forward with credible information. Detectives interviewed more than 150 people during the first 6 months of the investigation. They looked at every angle. They investigated ex-boyfriends, acquaintances, and anyone who might have had even a tenuous connection to Jennifer. One man who had gone on a few dates with Jennifer 2 years earlier was questioned extensively. He had an alibi for the night of the murder. He had been at a family gathering in another city. Multiple people confirmed his presence. Detectives cleared him as a suspect. They also looked into hospital staff more thoroughly. They ran background checks on everyone who worked at Sartori Memorial. A few employees had minor criminal records for things like DUIs or petty theft, but no one had a history of violence. In early 1999, detectives received a tip from a man who said he had seen a suspicious vehicle near the hospital on the night Jennifer disappeared. The man said he had been driving home from a late shift at a factory in Waterloo. He said he had noticed a dark-colored pickup truck in the hospital parking lot. He said the truck had been parked away from the main lights and the driver had been sitting inside. The man said he had not thought much of it at the time, but after hearing about Jennifer's murder, he wondered if it was connected. Detectives interviewed him extensively. They asked him to describe the truck. He said it was dark blue or black. He said it was an older model, possibly from the 1980s. He could not remember the license plate or any other distinguishing features. Detectives tried to verify the man's story. They asked hospital staff if they remembered seeing a truck matching that description. No one did. They checked if anyone who worked at the hospital or had been a patient that night owned a truck fitting that description. They found 3 people who owned older, dark-colored trucks. Detectives interviewed all of them. All 3 had alibis and no connection to Jennifer. The tip led nowhere. Detectives received dozens of other tips over the following months. Most were from people who thought they had seen something but could not provide specific details. A few were from people who wanted to implicate someone they knew for personal reasons. Detectives followed up on every tip. None led to a breakthrough. By the summer of 1999, the investigation had reached a dead end. Detective Holloway and his team had exhausted all leads. They had interviewed everyone they could think of. They had processed every piece of evidence they had collected. They had no suspects. They had no clear motive. They had no witnesses. The case remained open, but there was nothing more they could do without new information. Detective Holloway continued to review the case file periodically. He never stopped thinking about Jennifer Hayes. He kept her photo on his desk. He promised himself that if new evidence ever emerged, he would pursue it relentlessly. Rachel Hayes struggled to move forward with her life. She returned to Des Moines, but she called the Cedar Falls Police Department every few months. She wanted to know if there had been any progress. The answer was always the same. There had not. Rachel started a small memorial fund in Jennifer's name. She used the money to provide scholarships for nursing students at Allen College. She wanted something positive to come from her sister's death. She attended the scholarship ceremonies every year. She told the students about Jennifer and what kind of person she had been. She said Jennifer had loved being a nurse and had cared deeply about helping people. Karen eventually left Sartori Memorial Hospital. She could not walk through the emergency department without thinking about Jennifer. She took a job at a clinic in a different town. She stayed in touch with Rachel. They talked on the phone a few times a year. They both carried the weight of Jennifer's unsolved murder. They both wondered if they would ever know the truth. The community of Cedar Falls slowly moved on. People stopped talking about the case. New stories took its place in the local news. But for those who had known Jennifer, the pain never fully went away. Her murder remained a wound that had never healed. The years after Jennifer Hayes' murder were difficult for everyone involved. Detective Mark Holloway retired from the Cedar Falls Police Department in 2005. He had spent 7 years working Jennifer's case alongside his other duties. He had never been able to let it go. On his last day, he met with the detective who would inherit the case file. He told him everything he knew. He said he believed the killer had been someone Jennifer knew or someone who had watched her for a period of time before the attack. He said the lack of defensive wounds and the absence of a struggle at her home suggested she had gone with the person willingly, at least initially. He said he regretted not solving the case. He said it haunted him. The new detective assigned to the case was Michael Torres. He had joined the Cedar Falls Police Department in 2001. He had heard about Jennifer's murder but had not been directly involved. When he took over the case file, he spent weeks reading through every report, every interview transcript, and every piece of evidence. He saw the same dead ends that Holloway had encountered. He understood why the case had gone cold. There simply was not enough physical evidence to point to a suspect. The partial DNA profile that had been collected from Jennifer's neck in 1998 was incomplete. It had only a few markers. At the time, it had been insufficient for any meaningful comparison. Detective Torres knew that DNA technology had advanced significantly since 1998. He decided to see if the evidence could be retested. He contacted the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation Lab. He asked if the samples collected from Jennifer's body and clothing could be reanalyzed using newer techniques. The lab agreed to take another look. In 2006, forensic scientists extracted DNA from the same samples that had been tested 8 years earlier. This time, they were able to develop a more complete profile. The profile had 13 markers. It was enough to enter into the combined DNA index system known as CODIS, which is a national database of DNA profiles from convicted offenders and crime scenes. The DNA profile was entered into CODIS in early 2007. There was no match. This meant that whoever had killed Jennifer Hayes either had never been arrested for a crime that required DNA collection, or they had committed the murder before DNA databases were widely used. Detective Torres was disappointed, but not surprised. He knew that many cold cases remained unsolved even after DNA profiles were obtained. He kept the case file active. He reviewed it every few months. He waited for new information. In 2010, Rachel Hayes contacted the Cedar Falls Police Department. She had read an article about genetic genealogy being used to solve cold cases. The article described how investigators were using DNA from crime scenes and comparing it to profiles in public genealogy databases. These databases were built by people who had submitted their DNA to companies like 23andMe and Ancestry to learn about their heritage and find relatives. Investigators could upload DNA profiles from crime scenes and see if they matched any relatives of the person they were looking for. Rachel asked Detective Torres if this method could be used in Jennifer's case. Detective Torres said he would look into it. At that time, genetic genealogy was still a new and controversial technique. It had been used successfully in a few high-profile cases, most notably the Golden State Killer case in California, but it was not yet widely adopted. Detective Torres contacted the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation to ask if they had the capability to pursue genetic genealogy. They did not. The lab suggested he work with a private company that specialized in forensic genetic genealogy. Detective Torres applied for a grant to fund the work. The grant was approved in 2011. He sent the DNA profile from Jennifer's case to a company called Parabon Nanolabs. Parabon Nanolabs uploaded the DNA profile to a public genealogy database called GEDmatch. GEDmatch allowed law enforcement to search for relatives of unknown suspects. The search returned several matches. None were close relatives. The closest match was a third cousin. This meant that the person who had killed Jennifer Hayes shared a set of great-great-grandparents with the person in the database. Genetic genealogists at Parabon began building a family tree. They used public records, obituaries, census data, and other documents to trace the family lines back to the common ancestors. Then they worked forward, identifying all the descendants of those ancestors. This process took months. By mid-2012, the genealogists had identified a cluster of individuals who fit the profile. All were men who would have been between the ages of 20 and 50 in 1998. All had lived in or near Cedar Falls at the time of Jennifer's murder. The genealogists provided Detective Torres with a list of 18 names. Detective Torres began the painstaking process of investigating each person on the list. He checked their criminal histories. He looked at their employment records. He tried to determine if any of them had a connection to Jennifer or to Sartori Memorial Hospital. Most of the names were easy to rule out. Some had died before 1998. Others had been living in different states at the time. A few were women who had been mistakenly included due to errors in the family tree. By the end of 2012, Detective Torres had narrowed the list to 3 men. All 3 had lived in Cedar Falls in 1998. All 3 had no significant criminal records. All 3 were still alive. The first man was named Robert Caldwell. He was 58 years old in 2012. He had worked as a mechanic at a car dealership in Waterloo in 1998. Detective Torres interviewed him. Caldwell was cooperative. He said he did not know Jennifer Hayes. He said he had never been to Sartori Memorial Hospital except once when his daughter had broken her arm in 2001. Detective Torres asked if he would be willing to provide a DNA sample. Caldwell agreed. His DNA was tested. It was not a match. The second man was named Stephen Fletcher. He was 47 years old in 2012. He had worked as a manager at a grocery store in Cedar Falls in 1998. Detective Torres interviewed him. Fletcher was defensive. He said he did not understand why he was being questioned. He said he had never heard of Jennifer Hayes. Detective Torres explained that the investigation was based on genetic genealogy and that Fletcher was one of several people being looked at. Fletcher said he did not want to provide a DNA sample. Detective Torres explained that he could obtain a warrant if necessary. Fletcher reluctantly agreed to provide a sample. His DNA was tested. It was not a match. The third man was named Daniel Cross. He was 51 years old in 2012. He had worked as a hospital orderly at Sartori Memorial Hospital in 1998. Detective Torres felt a surge of adrenaline when he read this. Cross had worked at the same hospital as Jennifer. He had been there on the night she disappeared. Detective Torres pulled Cross's employment records. Cross had started working at Sartori Memorial in 1995. He had worked the evening shift. His duties included transporting patients, cleaning equipment, and assisting nurses with basic tasks. He had left the hospital in 2000. His employee file contained no complaints or disciplinary actions. Detective Torres located Daniel Cross. He was living in a small town about 40 miles from Cedar Falls. He was working as a janitor at an elementary school. Detective Torres decided to approach him carefully. He did not want to alert Cross that he was a suspect until he had more information. Detective Torres conducted surveillance on Cross for several days. He watched him go to work. He watched him return home. Cross lived alone in a small apartment. He drove an older sedan. He appeared to live a quiet and unremarkable life. Detective Torres obtained Cross's financial records, phone records, and vehicle registration history. He found that Cross had owned a dark blue pickup truck in 1998. He had sold it in early 1999. Detective Torres tracked down the current owner of the truck. The truck had changed hands several times over the years. The current owner had bought it in 2005 and had made significant modifications to it. Detective Torres asked if he could examine the truck. The owner agreed. Forensic technicians searched the truck but found nothing of value. Too much time had passed. The truck had been cleaned, repainted, and reupholstered multiple times. Detective Torres decided it was time to interview Daniel Cross. He drove to the elementary school where Cross worked and waited for him to finish his shift. When Cross walked out to his car, Detective Torres approached him. He identified himself and asked if Cross would be willing to answer some questions. Cross looked surprised but agreed. They sat in Detective Torres's vehicle. Detective Torres asked Cross if he remembered working at Sartori Memorial Hospital. Cross said yes. Detective Torres asked if he remembered Jennifer Hayes. Cross paused. He said the name sounded familiar, but he was not sure. Detective Torres showed him a photo of Jennifer. Cross studied it. He said he might have seen her around the hospital, but he did not know her personally. Detective Torres asked Cross what he remembered about October 14, 1998. Cross said he did not remember that specific date. Detective Torres explained that Jennifer Hayes had disappeared that night after leaving the hospital. He asked if Cross had been working that evening. Cross said he did not remember. Detective Torres said he had checked the records and Cross had been scheduled to work. Cross said that if the records said he was there, then he probably was. Detective Torres asked if Cross remembered seeing Jennifer that night. Cross said no. Detective Torres asked where Cross had gone after his shift ended. Cross said he probably went home. Detective Torres asked if anyone could verify that. Cross said no, he lived alone. Detective Torres asked Cross if he owned a truck in 1998. Cross said yes. He said he had owned a blue Chevrolet pickup. Detective Torres asked why he had sold it. Cross said it had started having mechanical problems and he did not want to pay for repairs. Detective Torres asked if Cross would be willing to provide a DNA sample. Cross's demeanor changed. He became guarded. He asked why Detective Torres wanted his DNA. Detective Torres explained that they were using genetic genealogy to investigate Jennifer's case and that Cross's name had come up. Cross said he did not want to provide a sample. He said he did not have to. Detective Torres said that was true, but that it would help rule him out as a suspect. Cross said he wanted to talk to a lawyer. The interview ended. Detective Torres knew that Cross's refusal to provide a DNA sample was not enough to obtain a warrant. He needed more evidence. He decided to try to obtain Cross's DNA through other means. This is a technique called abandoned DNA collection. If a person discards an item in a public place, such as a coffee cup or a cigarette, police can collect it and test the DNA on it. Detective Torres resumed surveillance on Cross. He followed him to a coffee shop. He watched Cross buy a coffee and sit at a table. When Cross finished and threw the cup in the trash, Detective Torres waited for him to leave. Then he retrieved the cup. He sent it to the lab for testing. The DNA on the coffee cup was tested and compared to the DNA profile from Jennifer Hayes' case. It was a match. The lab confirmed with a high degree of certainty that Daniel Cross had been the source of the DNA found on Jennifer's neck. Detective Torres immediately obtained an arrest warrant. On March 15, 2013, nearly 15 years after Jennifer Hayes was murdered, Daniel Cross was arrested at his apartment. He was charged with first-degree murder. The arrest was front-page news in Cedar Falls. Rachel Hayes received a call from Detective Torres. He told her they had arrested someone. Rachel broke down crying. She had waited 15 years for this moment. She asked Detective Torres who it was. He told her it was a man named Daniel Cross who had worked at the hospital with Jennifer. Rachel did not recognize the name. Detective Torres explained that Cross had been an orderly. He had worked in the background. He had not been someone Jennifer would have interacted with regularly. Rachel asked if they were sure he was the right person. Detective Torres said yes. He said the DNA match was conclusive. Daniel Cross refused to speak to investigators after his arrest. He hired a lawyer. He pleaded not guilty. The case went to trial in 2014. The prosecution presented the DNA evidence. They presented Cross's connection to the hospital. They presented the fact that he had owned a truck matching the description from the tip received in 1999. They presented his refusal to cooperate with the investigation. The defense argued that the DNA evidence was not enough to prove Cross had murdered Jennifer. They said the DNA could have been transferred innocently. They said Cross had worked at the hospital and could have had incidental contact with Jennifer. The prosecution countered that the DNA had been found on Jennifer's neck in the pattern consistent with strangulation. They said there was no innocent explanation for that. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 3 days. They returned a guilty verdict. Daniel Cross was convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict, Detective Torres held a press conference. He thanked the forensic genealogists and the lab technicians who had worked on the case. He said justice had finally been served for Jennifer Hayes. Rachel Hayes also spoke. She said she was grateful that her sister's killer had been caught. She said she wished Jennifer were still alive, but that at least now she could rest knowing the truth. The question that haunted everyone after Daniel Cross's conviction was why? Why had he killed Jennifer Hayes? The DNA evidence proved he had strangled her. The circumstantial evidence placed him at the hospital on the night she disappeared. He had owned a truck matching the description from the witness. He had worked alongside Jennifer for 3 years. But none of this explained what had motivated him to murder her. Cross refused to speak about the case. He maintained his silence even after his conviction. His lawyer said Cross had nothing to say. The prosecution had presented a theory during the trial, but it was based on limited information. Detective Torres believed there was more to the story. He wanted to understand what had led to Jennifer's death. After the trial, Detective Torres continued to investigate. He went back through Cross's employment records at Sartori Memorial Hospital. He interviewed former co-workers who had known Cross during the years he worked there. Most people remembered him as quiet and unremarkable. He did his job. He kept to himself. He did not socialize with other staff members. A few nurses remembered that Cross had sometimes lingered near the nurses' stations. One nurse said he had a habit of watching people. She said it had made her uncomfortable, but she had never reported it because he had never done anything inappropriate. Another nurse said Cross had once asked her personal questions about where she lived and what kind of car she drove. She said she had told him it was none of his business, and he had walked away. Detective Torres also spoke with a woman named Patricia Cross, Daniel Cross's ex-wife. They had been married from 1992 to 1997. Patricia said the marriage had ended because Cross had become increasingly controlling and jealous. She said he had monitored her movements and had accused her of cheating on him even though she had not. She said he had never been physically violent, but he had frightened her with his intensity. She said she had filed for divorce and had moved out of state to get away from him. Detective Torres asked if Cross had ever mentioned Jennifer Hayes. Patricia said no. She said she had not known anyone from the hospital because Cross had never talked about his work. Detective Torres requested Cross's medical and mental health records. The records showed that Cross had been treated for depression in the early 1990s. He had been prescribed medication but had stopped taking it after a few months. There was no record of any violent behavior or threats. There was no indication that he had been diagnosed with any personality disorder. Detective Torres also looked into Cross's childhood. Cross had grown up in a small town in Iowa. His parents had both died in a car accident when he was 19. He had no siblings. He had drifted from job to job before settling into work as a hospital orderly. There was nothing in his background that explained why he had become a murderer. The breakthrough came in 2015, a year after Cross's conviction. A woman named Angela Morrison contacted the Cedar Falls Police Department. She said she had information about Daniel Cross. She said she had been a patient at Sartori Memorial Hospital in 1997. She had been admitted for surgery. She said Cross had been assigned to transport her from her room to the operating room. She said during the transport, he had made comments about her appearance. She said he had touched her arm in a way that had felt inappropriate. She said she had been too scared and disoriented from medication to say anything at the time. After she was discharged, she had tried to forget about it. When she heard about Cross's arrest for Jennifer's murder, she realized she should have reported what happened. Detective Torres interviewed Angela Morrison extensively. She described Cross's behavior in detail. She said he had been overly familiar and had invaded her personal space. She said he had asked her questions about her personal life that had nothing to do with her medical care. She said she had felt trapped because she was on a gurney and he was pushing her down a hallway. Detective Torres asked if Cross had done anything physical beyond touching her arm. She said no. She said the interaction had lasted only a few minutes before they reached the operating room. Detective Torres asked if she would be willing to make a formal statement. She said yes. Detective Torres used Angela Morrison's information to obtain a warrant to search Cross's personal belongings that had been stored after his arrest. The police had seized items from his apartment in 2013, but had focused primarily on evidence related to Jennifer's case. Now, Detective Torres wanted to look for anything that might indicate a pattern of behavior toward women. The storage unit contained boxes of Cross's papers, photographs, and personal items. Detective Torres and another detective spent days going through everything. They found a notebook. Inside were pages of handwritten notes. The notes were about women. There were descriptions of their appearances, their routines, and their habits. Some of the women were identified by name. Others were described only by physical characteristics. One section of the notebook was about Jennifer Hayes. Cross had written down her work schedule. He had noted what kind of car she drove. He had written about where she lived. He had described her as quiet and careful. He had written that she was always alone. The notes dated back to 1996, 2 years before Jennifer's murder. Detective Torres read through the entries with growing horror. It was clear that Cross had been watching Jennifer for a long time. He had been planning something. The notes became more detailed as time went on. In 1998, Cross had written about following Jennifer home from work. He had written about seeing her stop at the gas station. He had written about her routine of going straight home and staying inside. The notebook also contained notes about other women. Some were nurses at the hospital. Some were patients. Some were women Cross had seen in public places. Detective Torres counted 12 women who were mentioned by name. He began contacting them. Most did not remember Cross. A few remembered him vaguely as someone who worked at the hospital. 2 women said Cross had made them uncomfortable. One said he had shown up at a grocery store where she was shopping and had tried to talk to her. She said she had told him to leave her alone. Another woman said Cross had called her at home even though she had never given him her number. She said he had claimed he got it from the hospital directory. She said she had reported it to hospital administration, but nothing had been done. Detective Torres brought this new information to the prosecutor. They discussed whether Cross could be charged with any additional crimes. The prosecutor said the statute of limitations had expired for most of the behavior described in the notebook. The only exception was if any of the women wanted to come forward with allegations of assault or stalking that had occurred more recently. Detective Torres contacted all 12 women again. None wanted to pursue charges. Most said they wanted to move on with their lives. Detective Torres understood, but he was frustrated. He believed Cross had been a predator who had targeted vulnerable women for years. Jennifer Hayes had been his victim, but she might not have been his only one. Before we continue this case, if you love the way we present stories here, kindly hit that like button and also drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'll reply with a strange fact about your location you didn't know. The truth about why Daniel Cross killed Jennifer Hayes emerged during a conversation between Cross and his cellmate in 2016. The cellmate was a man named Raymond Butler who was serving time for armed robbery. Butler later told authorities that Cross had talked about the murder. Butler said Cross had admitted that he had been obsessed with Jennifer for years. Cross said he had wanted to have a relationship with her, but she had never paid attention to him. Cross said he had tried to talk to her at work, but she had been polite but distant. Cross said he had felt invisible to her. He said it had made him angry. Cross told Butler that on the night of October 14, 1998, he had decided to approach Jennifer one more time. He said he had waited in the hospital parking lot after his shift ended. He said he had watched Jennifer walk to her car. He said he had walked over and had offered to help her with something. Jennifer had said no thank you and had gotten into her car. Cross said he had then told her he needed to talk to her about something important. Jennifer had rolled down her window slightly. Cross said he had told her he had feelings for her and wanted to take her out. Jennifer had said she was not interested. Cross said she had been kind about it but firm. Cross said that rejection had triggered something in him. Cross told Butler that he had grabbed the car door before Jennifer could drive away. He said he had opened the door and had gotten into the passenger seat. Jennifer had been startled and had told him to get out. Cross said he had refused. He said he had told her they needed to talk. Jennifer had reached for her purse to get her phone. Cross said he had grabbed her wrist to stop her. He said they had struggled. Cross said he had not planned to hurt her, but he had lost control. He said he put his hands around her neck. He said he squeezed. Cross told Butler that Jennifer had tried to fight, but he had been stronger. He said it had happened quickly. He said when he realized she was dead, he had panicked. Cross told Butler that he had driven Jennifer's car out of the parking lot with her body in the passenger seat. He said he had driven to the wooded area where her body was later found. He said he carried her into the woods and had left her there. He said he had then driven her car to a remote field and had abandoned it. He said he walked several miles to a gas station and had called a friend to pick him up. He said he had told the friend his truck had broken down. The friend had never questioned it. Cross told Butler that he had gone home and had tried to act normal. He said he had gone to work the next day. He said he had been terrified that someone would figure out what he had done, but no one had suspected him. Raymond Butler reported this conversation to the authorities in late 2016. Detective Torres interviewed Butler extensively. He asked Butler to repeat everything Cross had said. Butler provided a detailed account. Detective Torres had Butler's story evaluated by prosecutors. They determined that Butler's testimony could be used if Cross ever appealed his conviction. Butler had no reason to lie. He was already serving his own sentence and was not offered any deals in exchange for his information. The prosecutors believed Butler was telling the truth. Detective Torres felt a sense of relief. Finally, there was a complete picture of what had happened to Jennifer Hayes. The information from Butler was shared with Rachel Hayes. Detective Torres met with her in person. He explained that Cross had confessed to his cellmate. He told her what Cross had said. Rachel listened in silence. When Detective Torres finished, she asked if Jennifer had suffered. Detective Torres said the medical examiner had determined that death would have occurred within a few minutes. He said Jennifer would have lost consciousness quickly. Rachel nodded. She said she was glad to finally know the truth. She said it did not bring Jennifer back, but it gave her some closure. She said she hoped Cross spent the rest of his life thinking about what he had done. The revelation that Cross had been obsessed with Jennifer for years and had killed her after she rejected him was shared with the media. The story received national attention. It became a case study in workplace safety and the dangers of obsessive behavior. Sartori Memorial Hospital issued a statement saying they had updated their policies regarding staff conduct and harassment. They said they had implemented new training programs to help employees recognize warning signs of dangerous behavior. They said they were committed to ensuring the safety of their staff and patients. Some former employees criticized the hospital for not doing enough when Cross had been reported for inappropriate behavior in the past. The hospital said they had no record of any formal complaints against Cross. The criticism continued, but the hospital did not change its position. Daniel Cross remains in prison. He is serving his life sentence at the Iowa State Penitentiary in Fort Madison. He has never publicly acknowledged his guilt. He has never apologized to Jennifer's family. He has filed multiple appeals, but all have been denied. The DNA evidence and the testimony from his cellmate have been upheld by every court that has reviewed the case. Legal experts say it is unlikely Cross will ever be released. He is now 63 years old. He spends most of his time in his cell. Other inmates avoid him. Guards say he is quiet and compliant. He does not cause trouble. He simply exists. Rachel Hayes has tried to move forward with her life. She still lives in Des Moines. She continued running the Memorial Scholarship Fund in Jennifer's name. The fund has provided financial assistance to more than 50 nursing students over the years. Rachel attends the scholarship ceremony every year. She speaks to the students about Jennifer. She tells them that Jennifer loved nursing and believed in helping people. She tells them to be careful and to trust their instincts if something feels wrong. She tells them that Jennifer's death should not have happened, but that it did. And the best way to honor her memory is to live with purpose and compassion. Rachel has never married. She has focused on her career and her volunteer work. She works as an accountant at a nonprofit organization. She volunteers at a domestic violence shelter. She says helping other women gives her a sense of purpose. She says it feels like something Jennifer would have done. Rachel still thinks about her sister every day. She says the pain has lessened over time, but it has never gone away. She says there are moments when she forgets Jennifer is gone and reaches for the phone to call her. Then she remembers. She says those moments are the hardest. Karen, Jennifer's friend from the hospital, left Cedar Falls years ago. She moved to a different state and started a new life. She stayed in touch with Rachel for a while, but eventually they lost contact. Karen sent Rachel a letter after Cross was convicted. In the letter, Karen said she was glad justice had been served. She said she still felt guilty for not taking Jennifer's concerns more seriously. She said she wished she had pushed Jennifer to talk about what was bothering her. She said she hoped Rachel could forgive her. Rachel wrote back and said there was nothing to forgive. She said no one could have known what Cross was planning. She said Karen had been a good friend to Jennifer, and that was what mattered. Detective Mark Holloway, who had originally investigated Jennifer's case, died in 2018. He had retired years earlier, but he had followed the case closely even after leaving the police department. When Cross was arrested in 2013, Holloway called Detective Torres to congratulate him. He said he had always believed the case could be solved if the right technology became available. He said he was proud that Torres had not given up. Holloway attended Cross's trial. He sat in the courtroom every day. When the guilty verdict was read, Holloway cried. His wife said he had carried the weight of Jennifer's unsolved murder for years. She said finally seeing justice done had lifted a burden from him. Detective Michael Torres still works for the Cedar Falls Police Department. He was promoted to sergeant in 2017. He continues to work cold cases when time allows. He says Jennifer's case changed the way he approaches investigations. He says it taught him the importance of patience and persistence. He says it also taught him that technology can solve cases that once seemed impossible. Torres has spoken at law enforcement conferences about the use of genetic genealogy in cold cases. He encourages other departments to revisit unsolved murders and see if new techniques can help. He says every victim deserves justice, no matter how much time has passed. The community of Cedar Falls has not forgotten Jennifer Hayes. A small memorial was placed in the park near her home. It consists of a bench with a plaque that reads, "In memory of Jennifer Hayes, 1966 to 1998, a kind and caring nurse." People sometimes leave flowers on the bench. Rachel visits the memorial when she comes to Cedar Falls. She sits on the bench and talks to Jennifer. She tells her about what is happening in her life. She tells her that the person who killed her is in prison. She tells her that she is missed. She tells her that she will never be forgotten. The case also had a broader impact on how hospitals handle employee behavior. After Cross's conviction, several hospitals in Iowa reviewed their policies on reporting and investigating staff misconduct. Some implemented anonymous hotlines where employees could report concerns without fear of retaliation. Some created committees to review complaints and take action when necessary. Advocates for workplace safety said these changes were long overdue. They said too many institutions had ignored warning signs because they did not want to deal with conflict or because they were afraid of legal liability. They said Jennifer's death should serve as a reminder that institutions have a responsibility to protect their employees. Jennifer Hayes' murder was a tragedy that should not have happened. She was a dedicated nurse who cared about her patients. She was a loyal friend and a loving sister. She had her whole life ahead of her. That life was stolen by a man who could not accept rejection. Daniel Cross took something that could never be replaced. He destroyed a family. He traumatized a community. He created pain that still echoes more than 2 decades later. The fact that he was eventually caught and convicted does not undo the harm he caused. It does not bring Jennifer back. It does not erase the years that Rachel spent wondering who had killed her sister. But the conviction did provide some measure of justice. It showed that even when cases go cold, they are not hopeless. It showed that advances in science and technology can crack open investigations that seemed impossible to solve. It showed that dedicated investigators who refuse to give up can make a difference. It showed that victims and their families matter, and that society will not forget them even when years pass. Jennifer Hayes' case became a symbol of what can be achieved when law enforcement, forensic scientists, and communities work together. It became a reminder that every life has value, and every death deserves answers. Rachel Hayes said it best during a television interview after Cross's conviction. She said that Jennifer had been more than a victim. She had been a person with dreams, hopes, and people who loved her. She said that while nothing could bring Jennifer back, knowing the truth about what happened and seeing her killer held accountable gave her a sense of peace. She said she would spend the rest of her life making sure Jennifer was remembered not for how she died, but for how she lived. She said that was the only way to take back some of what Cross had stolen. She said that was the only way to win. If this story moved you, you need to hear the story of the Bridge Creek vanishing, another decades-old mystery that finally found its answer.